Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guild titled Rewriting Our Own Stories. Now, this season at Brown Girl Guild, we're exploring what it means to truly love yourself. What it means to truly dig deep into the concept of self love and align all your actions that you have in life to that self love that you're committed to. When I was growing up, I felt like I didn't really see good examples of self love and, examples of people who truly loved themselves. And anytime that I did see someone who loved themselves a lot, I felt like it always felt like they were painted or portrayed as selfish people, as like narcissistic people, or people who decided to put themselves first over supposedly putting community and family first. And it was always such a negative thing to put yourself first or to be truly in love with yourself. And even now, I feel like I'm slowly unlearning the idea that loving myself is not selfish, because I think that we often equate self love with selfishness, and that's not necessarily the case. When I think about how harmful it's actually been to grow up without examples of true self love, of like authentic self love, I think about how much my life would have been so much better if I actually had examples of self loving people in my life. And more importantly, if I had examples of self loving women in my life. So now, as an adult, when I see examples of bold, badass women really committed to their self love journey, really committed to digging deep into this concept of self love, and like I mentioned, aligning their actions with self love, I get really stoked. I'm like, yo, look, it's the boss babe doing her thing. And even if she's not a boss babe, if she's just a babe, or if she's just a boss and she's doing her thing, I get really, really excited about it too. The guest for this episode, Bali, or Lady B as we know her, is an example of a brown woman that I came across later on in life. I mean, let's be real, actually. I've always known her because I listened to her voice growing up. And side note, the first time that I met her, I had no idea what she actually looked like, but I was in this like big space and, somebody spoke and I turned around. I'm like, oh my God, it's the person that I hear on the radio all the time. But Bali is an example of a bold, badass brown woman who I met later on in life and looked at and thought, there it is. There is a woman who is embracing the concept of self love, and she's doing it so beautifully and so authentically to her. And so I haven't really explicitly gotten a chance to ask any guests during this season. How are you so committed to your self love journey? And what does it mean to truly love yourself? And with Bali, that's exactly what I want to ask. I want to ask her what it means to truly love yourself, how she's doing it for herself, how she's showing up authentically and digging deep into that concept of self love. And I want to ask her what it means to be on this side of that self love journey and talk about the different versions of Bali that it's taken to get to this version of Bali as well. Now, for those of us who are still getting acquainted with and new to Lady B or Bali is the owner and host of Swaraj Radio 96.1 FM. So right when I said that, you're like, I know who you're talking about. Now, she is an incredibly multidimensional woman. She's part of radio, she's been in the media game, she's a storyteller, she's an activist, she's a businesswoman, and most recently, she's also a therapist in training. And again, there's so many different layers and so many different characters and so many different, I guess, like aspects to her personality and her identity that have really come in to usher out this version of Bali. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about what it means to rewrite our own stories. And there's a quote that Bali said to me in our initial conversation when I was still approaching her about the podcast that really set the tone for this episode. She said, we're allowed to rewrite our own stories. It's a radical act of self love to do so. And I think that it's so important that we take the control and the narrative and the responsibility for our own stories. And we don't leave it up to other people to tell our stories for us. And so this episode is going to be a story about Lady B and Bali and whether those are the same people, whether they're different people. We're going to find out. Hi, Bali. Welcome to the Brown Girl Guild podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here.
I want to ask you first and foremost what it feels like for you to be on the other side of the microphone for a change.
I actually am really excited about this and it feels really good.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like you deserve to be on that side of
Oh,
the
thank you.
microphone. And, I feel like ever since the day I met you, I was just waiting for this moment to be able to sit down and be on this side. I mean, of course, I would love to be on the other side as well, but I was so excited to be on this side of the microphone.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been listening to the work you've been doing, and I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, this podcast episode is titled Rewriting Our Own Stories. And I was saying in the intro that growing up, I really didn't have examples of people, and especially women, who were practicing self love. And any time that I felt like I did know of somebody who was a little bit different, who, kind of chose themselves over other people, it was always like they were spoken about really negatively in the family, or they were referred
Mm,
to as like selfish, and there was always something bad about them. But the more I grew up, the more I realized that, oh, they're actually just practicing boundaries and putting themselves first. And so growing up, I always felt like I was, never around good models of self love. And then now, when I think about as an adult woman, how important it would have been and how much of a lack it actually has been to not have witnessed, especially brown women around me who are practicing self love. And now, as an adult, anytime I do see brown women who are, really committed to the practice of self love, I get incredibly excited. And that is exactly why you are, a guest on this season for the Brown Girl Guilt podcast when we're exploring what it means to love ourselves, because you are a brown woman that I have found later on in my life, who is committed to the practice of self love. And I'm just so curious to ask you so much about that practice and journey.
and I feel really honored that you chose me for this episode in particular because it feels really good to be seen in that journey,
Mhm.
that I'm doing that work. So thank you.
You're the only guest that I'm gonna likely ask this question to during this season. I think everybody else, we've kind of talked about it, in a more inexplicit way. But I want to ask you explicitly what it has meant to truly love yourself, and what it's looked like for you to embark on this self love journey.
Mm. I do believe that I'm stepping into a long journey, so I've by no means arrived, but stepping into this journey of loving myself has been an act of liberation.
Mm,
It has meant coming home, owning and writing my own narrative, my own stories. It's meant diving into all the shadows within to explore all the dark places where shame, guilt, and self esteem lingered in the recesses, to see what those places needed me to hear and understand, and honoring the pain lingered in these places. It's really meant examining the stories that I carried, stories I heard about me that others wrote, asking
mm,
myself if they're true. And the brain it can be a devastating thing because it literally can have us believing what isn't true of us and seeing ourselves through the eyes of our attackers. And in this case, I'll call that enemy, it's a strong word, a general one, patriarchy, among other
mhm,
systems. And so the enemy of self love, I think, is shame. And
mhm,
I really think that shame culturally is something that is so encouraged and celebrated, like Sharm here and all of that. And, as a kid, most of us heard Sharm God, Sharm God. But shame is such a devastating emotion, and it makes me really sad to think of how many decades I carried it. So much so that I feel that I want to be an ambassador against shame. Shame makes us believe that I am bad. And how do you love yourself with that belief? How do you love yourself thinking I am bad? So, rewriting my story through my own lens, a factual lens, has really allowed me to put down what isn't mine and have compassion for myself in the places I held shame. And that compassion has turned into a journey of radical self love and the fine art of not abandoning myself, which is something I think we are taught to do as brown people, especially as brown women. And I feel that we spend our lives being there for others, but not ourselves, falling in love with the universe inside other people and ignoring our own rich inner landscape. So, yeah, that's what it's kind of looked like for me thus far.
That was all so eloquently spoken. I think we can just end the podcast episode here.
Thank you.
Oh, man. No, that
I
was
think
I
about
love
this a lot.
Yeah, I think that I'm sitting here thinking, wow, it's so succinctly and so eloquently put that you have definitely spent time on like thinking about that and really forming that for yourself. There's so many beautiful things that you said. I want to start with the part about shame. So, when I was starting the Brown Girl Guilt podcast, there was a moment where I said to some of my team members, I said, what if we talked about shame instead? What if the
Mm,
premise of the podcast was shame and not guilt? Because I thought, actually, I don't know if what I'm feeling is guilt or if it's shame. I think they're
mhm,
both like kind of the same, but they're also very different. You know,
mhm,
um, I think that when I was looking through the definitions and trying to figure out like no which direction I wanted to go in, I mean, obviously I've chosen guilt, but when I was thinking about shame, shame was something that felt like it was done to you. It was something that you were taught to feel.
mhm,
And so is guilt, right? Both shame and guilt are such external influences for such deep internal emotions. Like both shame and guilt are so deeply embedded in us, but they don't necessarily come from within us. It's what we're conditioned to feel, it's what we're conditioned to believe about ourselves. And I love what you said, asking yourself if the stories you've heard about yourself are true, asking
mhm,
yourself if it's right for you to actually be carrying such a heavy burden of shame for the things that have happened to you or you've done or who you are. And just even that act of asking yourself if I should even be feeling shameful for X, Y, and Z, or if I should even be feeling guilty for XYZ is something that, I know like a lot of the women in my, let's say, my mom's generation or my aunts and uncle generation weren't allowed to ask themselves.
mhm. And I mean, even though they're very similar, I think that guilt is I did something bad, right? And you can feel sorry for that. But
Hmm.
shame is so much more devastating because shame is not that I did something bad, but that I am bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a stigma that you carry about yourself. And then, the shame and stigma again are also so attached. I have a book called Stigma by, sociologist Irving Goffman on my bookshelf because I think we are so conditioned in our community in our culture to feel shame for things that are beyond our control sometimes. Um
Absolutely.
and, I think you're so right in that the enemy of self love is shame. I had to really
Mhm.
work on myself. I had to really work on releasing both guilt and shame last year around this time before I could embark on a podcast because those are really heavy things to work through. And, I love what you said about the fine art of not abandoning myself. And I want you to tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, we all want to experience connection, right? And we want to feel validated and we want to feel that what we're doing is okay. And I feel like, in my experience, often to preserve relationships, I would abandon myself. And that might
Hmm.
mean, not saying what I think. It might mean not saying when I'm upset. It
Hmm.
might mean just kind of keeping the status quo. And I learned what abandoning myself looks like. And so now I'm able to really check in, like when there's conflict or when things are going on. I put my hand on my heart and I think of this little girl inside and think, wait, am I abandoning you? And
Hmm.
I will not abandon myself. I just feel like from the moment we're born, Punjabi women, we are taught to abandon ourselves because it's all about somebody else and about caring for the other. And I don't celebrate that way of life.
Hmm. Yeah, we spend so much of our lives outside of us,
Hmm.
right? So much of our lives outside of us. And so then when you say, self love is like an act of coming home, returning home, I think that's
Hmm.
also like, that's right there in the mission of the Brown Girl Guild podcast as well to say that, how can we start to love ourselves on this beautiful journey back home to ourselves? Because it's like a homecoming. It's when you've been taught to really locate
Isn't
your
it?
self-worth, yeah, and locate your happiness and your your expression of love outside of you. It is a radical reclamation when you decide to say, no, all of that is actually inside of me. I don't need to go anywhere else to look for X, Y, and Z because there is a plethora of, possibilities inside of me and then of myself.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sentiment. I love the idea of looking at a journey of self love as coming home to yourself.
Hmm.
Um, there's a caption on one of your Instagram posts, and it reads, "On the great stage of life, after testing out a few different characters, I have decided to exit the matrix and return to my original programming."
Hmm.
Um, so again, beautifully put. I know that you are a talker for a living, but I think you should also be like a writer because you're so good with writing words.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
I want to talk about those different characters you've tested out. How many different versions do you feel like you've been through, and what has it been like to be all those different versions of yourself?
Mm. I feel like we're a different version every moment, right? Because
Hmm.
every moment we're growing and it doesn't feel like it at the time, but when you look back sometimes and it's hard to recognize versions of yourself. And I would kind of answer that by saying, it's the age old question, right? Asked by all those who seek is who am I, right? Back to
Hmm.
good old curiosity. And so part of self love for me involves knowing who I am. And again, it's
Hmm.
a journey, which for most of us is really steeped in discovering who we are. And it's the process of that you really begin to fall in love with yourself. And it's in the process of that I've been falling in love with myself. So returning to my original programming, well, it's complex. I am returning with each piece of me that I rediscover that I lost along the way. And I've been many versions of myself, all fabulous, of course.
No doubt.
But may I but also being able to have compassion for all the versions, the masks that I wore to keep myself protected, safe from danger. I see them now. And
Mhm.
drawing new boundaries, seeking my validation from within has really let me take my power back, and that creates a more viable safety where who I really am gets to come out and explore. And it's kind of like a way of mothering myself, that girl who had to hide pieces to survive. I've created for her an environment where she can come out to play and kind
Mhm.
of let the creatrix out.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you've touched on something really important here, which is sometimes the masks that we wear are meant and are in place to protect us from certain situations,
Absolutely.
right? And so, in that way, we have to have so much compassion for ourselves and those masks because, for a long time when we were living in survival mode as opposed to like living mode, and, when we were human doing and not human being, whatever cliche you want to use, those masks were meant to protect us. And I think, like in your case, and I'm hoping one day in my case, um, it has to be also very difficult to navigate so many different versions of yourself and different masks that you wear when you are someone who is kind of in the public light. Like, a lot of people
Hmm.
know you by your name, know you by your voice, know you by the way that you look, right? Like, you can walk into a space and people know who you are. I couldn't imagine navigating my journey of self discovery up until this point in the kind of way that you might have had to navigate it.
Hmm. And, I'm older and wiser, I'd like to think. And
Hmm.
I've really started on this journey a couple of years ago. And, one of the beginning points of that journey was putting down my ego mask, right?
Yeah.
So hiding behind Lady B as, this is where I get my validation and, people listen to me, people want to talk to me, and hence I must be okay. And actually getting to a point where honestly, I realized that my ego wasn't hungry. It was my soul that was hungry.
Hmm.
And that realization really changed my path.
Right.
And I practice, this journey in safety. Like I
Hmm.
do protect those pieces of me that have served me well. Um,
Hmm.
And because it is a brutal world out there, right? And I think as women, we have to kind of be our own protection in knowing where it's safe and how much to share and how private and how public to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, even before we started this episode, for everyone that's listening, I asked Bali, should I call you Bali or should I call you Lady B? Because I think that
Mhm,
is a question that's important for me to ask. And it's something that, it's a really interesting discussion that I've had with a couple people on the podcast who have like a stage name and then also have like, their birth name. And sometimes it can be, even if you don't have a stage name, if there's like like a different name that you've gone by in
mm,
life, I think that there's always that push and pull between, which version you are. And, I was so happy to hear you say Bali and not necessarily Lady B. Do you
mhm.
feel like they are the same person? Do you feel like, or they're like two, like the same part of the, different parts of the same coin? How do you see those 2?
So Lady B is just one small part of me, right?
Hmm.
And Bali is all of me.
Hmm.
And that's really how I would describe it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm wondering if I'm gonna have that dilemma one day because my birth name is Harpreet and I go by Harpo to the world.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I feel like I'm really comfortable and happy with Harpo because it's the personality that I've built for myself as opposed to the name that I was given based on, and the personality that I would eventually make. But I wonder if one day, 10 years from now, I'm gonna look back and wish I had put Harpreet on everything and not Harpo.
And here's the thing, you're always allowed to change your mind.
Hmm.
You're allowed to be and, whoever you choose to be that day just because you've done something a certain way. People seem to have that idea, "Well, you used to do this." Uh-huh. I used to, you know? It's like
Hmm.
you're allowed to change. You should be changing, in fact.
Yes, and I mean, like, very obviously, as the title of the episode reads, we're allowed to rewrite our own stories. If this is something
Mhm.
that you said to me on the phone when I first called you and said, "Billy, will you be a guest on the episode on the podcast?" You said we're allowed to rewrite our own stories. It's a radical act of self-love to do so because how unfortunate and how sad it would be for us to, sit in the present moment and feel like we want to do X, but we're so tied to Y because that's what we did all that time ago, or that's the decision that we made with that limited information and knowledge about ourselves and the world. We should be able to honor how we're feeling in this moment and be able to change accordingly.
Did I say that?
You did. Yeah, I wrote it
Yeah.
down.
Wise words.
I'm telling you, you have a way with words.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So another word that you actually said earlier in the beginning of the podcast episode that I would love to touch on is you said the enemy in your life was patriarchy. What do you mean by that?
Oh my goodness, that's a whole subject all on its own.
Spark Notes version.
Mhm. I feel like the patriarchy, the way that it's manifested in my life, has really made me not feel safe being all of myself, right?
Mhm.
Like as women, especially as women in Punjabi media, we're so judged. We're under the magnifying glass. Everybody has something to say. They have their own standards. They think they have their own ideas of how a woman should be, what a woman should be. And, going back even to that, like I want to take it back to the people that love us, right, when we're born.
Mhm.
And I often wonder, I'm like, when did I learn? When did I decide that I'm supposed to quiet my voice? When did I
Yeah.
learn that I'm supposed to keep my eyes down? When did I learn
Mhm.
all this stuff that doesn't serve me, right? And so, it's that system I think that just doesn't allow us to be free.
Mhm.
Yeah, without getting into too much else because like I said, that's such a complex
Yeah.
topic. Yeah, and I get
Yeah.
emotional.
I do too because when you said like my the one thing that I was told the most growing up was that Harpo, you talk too much. I was
Mhm.
always told you talk too much. And actually, the first time you and I met was at She Talks. And that was what my entire, She Talks, like, I guess, presentation or speech was on was talking too much. And I feel like it was always like my calling and my destiny to talk, to be a talker. I mean, I host a podcast now and I really want to make a career out of hosting and holding conversations. And I feel like it's something that I internalize so much because what you're saying to me is not you talk too much, but what you're saying is you're too much and
Exactly.
you take up too much space. And so to live your entire life shrinking yourself when you're not meant to be this small, um, it really impacts how you view yourself and how you navigate the world. And then one day, I don't know how it happens, but you wake up and you're like, my wings are tired of being down. I want to fly
Mm.
and I want to take up as
Mhm.
much space as I want in the sky with these wings. And then once you get a whiff of that and your wings have finally been stretched out, there's no way they're going to go back down.
And I just want to touch on that. I think it's such an important point. I think women's expression is deemed somehow dangerous,
Yeah.
even by other women. You know,
Hmm.
I'm kind of like you, like I'm a dreamer, and so I love words, and I like to think out loud and process with my friends and talk about and share the experience, right? And I
Hmm.
find sometimes people do think it's too much, and before maybe I would think buy into that belief. And now I kind of think, no, you know what? I am who I am. And this expression is a part of me. And if it makes you uncomfortable, then you need to step aside. But my voice is not going to dim.
Yeah. Because it's not just your physical voice, right? It's not just how
Mm-mm.
loud you speak or how much you laugh, right? It's your
Mhm.
voice is connected to, I mean, if we want to get existential about it and really spiritual about it, like your throat chakra is it's not just your physical voice. Your voice is, for me at least, that's where I find my power in my body. That's where I find power in my existence and how I navigate the world. And so when I've been told that it's too much, or when I'm told to stifle it, it creates a literal blockage in my energy flow, but it also creates a blockage in my navigation of the world and how I show up for myself and people around me. You're literally telling women who are open and expressive and curious that they shouldn't be those things, and that and to speak about what you spoke so eloquently about before is that I then you start to internalize and you start to feel really shameful for who you are.
Mhm.
But then you think to yourself, but this is what I'm actually good at, right? Like you don't tell people who are really good at doing, let's say, other things, right? Like speaking is like a profession and then it's a skill to have, but we don't ever say that to other people who use other like forms of expression to navigate through the world.
Mhm. And it's your energy, right? Like I really believe that in honoring of the conscious creator, that we co-create with, that we actually have a duty to be who we are and show up
Hmm.
in the energy that is our birthright,
Yes.
and that we shouldn't change our way of being for anybody because that is abandoning ourselves.
Mhm. It is abandoning your see, like even I was actually thinking about this when you were talking earlier about really committing yourself to not abandoning yourself. For me, abandoning myself has been making myself small. And, this was actually mentioned in another episode that we did in season two by Asad, by, Convict. And he said, like what a disservice it would be to me to not see the fullest expression of Harpo, for you to really
Mm,
not be, let's say, the entire the totality of Bali to the world, as opposed to just that one part of you, which is Lady B. Like when I was reading out your bio earlier in the intro, like all the things that you are, you're also now like a therapist in training. When we just peg people into those small boxes and we don't allow for their full expression, we actually miss out on all the different elements that they are. We don't allow for the multidimensionality. And what we do is we've written their story for them. And so anytime they do anything that contradicts the story that we've written for these people in our heads, we get upset and we get really confused.
absolutely.
So you've said that becoming is your word for the year. I also read that on your Instagram. And I want to talk to you about that. Why did you choose the word becoming? And what does becoming mean to you?
Becoming, it means to me going back to being who I was before the world told me who to be.
Mhm.
to reject other people's ideals, values, interests, principles, and to discover and embody my own. To really practice being myself at my core. So, who am I when there's nobody to impress and nobody to fear? And like I said, I'm on the journey. I'm finding more and more pieces of myself. I'm constantly excited to see what treasure I will find next. And I'm crazy, Harpo. I will literally, I'm like, this is how far I go. I'm like, oh, I love grapes. Oh, wait, let me check that out. Do I love grapes? Right? Is that really mine? Like I'm testing every tiny piece. And I think that the act of becoming will continue the rest of my life because
Mhm.
and isn't that a beautiful thing? Because we spend our lives falling in love with universes that exist in others. But at the end of the day, the most beautiful love story is the one that we have with ourselves. And I really believe that.
Mhm. Yeah, look at that. The most beautiful love story we have is with ourselves.
Hmm.
And we're not taught that though, right? We're never
No,
taught that.
because you'd be dangerous, right? In a
Yeah.
system that thrives on people being the same, it's dangerous if you're fully expressed, right? And
Mhm.
I understand where that danger, um, or that feeling comes from. But we are the ancestors, right? We live
Yeah.
in a safer world. We live in a different world where we have different choices, and it doesn't serve us to stay in the status quo.
No, and it would make it a lot harder for companies to sell things to us if we loved ourselves, you
Oh,
know?
of course, yeah.
The entire world, there's a billion-dollar industry that, literally runs on the self-loathing of women and their own
Mhm,
selves, right?
mhm.
And I
And
just yeah.
I was going to say, and don't you think that people fear freedom, right? They
Yeah.
fear their own power. And so sometimes when they see other people expressing theirs or claiming theirs, it's like a trigger. It's like, like they can't bear to see it because deep down in their soul, they know it's something that they desperately want. And yet
Mhm.
most people are not even brave enough to say that they want it.
Well, I've been having that experience actually. So it's funny and anytime I try online dating, as soon as, whoever I'm talking to finds me on Instagram and they follow me, they stop talking to me. And I just think that's the funniest thing in the world. Cause I'm like, healing ain't for the faint of heart, baby. Like
No.
if you saw just one glance of it and it was too much for you, it was because it truly you're telling yourself it's too much for you, you know?
Hmm.
It has nothing to do with me. And you're right. It's just people get so triggered deep down that they feel like I would rather run the other way than jump headfirst into this, you know?
Hmm.
So with a month left, with just a month left in the year, have you feel like, you have become what you set out on? Like has the, when you chose the word become in the beginning of the year, do you feel like as we're nearing the end of the year that has become, really true for you?
So, like I said, it is a journey, and I think that the journey continues our whole lives because, all the pieces that we lost of ourselves, and it's a beautiful journey. I just feel like it's a treasure hunt, a
Mhm.
finding all of what is me. But I do believe that I have made huge strides in becoming, and I'm actually really proud of myself in how
Mhm.
much growth I've actually achieved for myself. You know, the way I draw boundaries now, the way I choose myself, the way I value myself, the way like I genuinely love myself. When I tell myself I love you. I remember doing
Mhm.
that before and affirmations and stuff, and somehow there wasn't. There wasn't integrity in the words, like when you see a cute little baby and you want to pinch the cheeks, right? Like
Mhm.
like I have that feeling for myself sometimes, right? And yeah, I do. And so it's a whole different knowing that I'm on my way. I always say that. I'm on my way.
Mhm. I love that. But I think like, even when when you and I first met and then we connected and we kind of stayed connected on social media, I think what really drew me to you was that commitment. And like, yes, I'm such a fan of your career, and I think that your career trajectory is something that I admire so much. But it was more than that. It was just who the person was behind that trajectory, and all of that was what really, really had me connect with you. And I think like I said, I didn't have those examples growing up. And I think,
Mm,
you might also be able to say that I also didn't have those examples. And I think what we're
mhm,
doing is by being those people for ourselves now, we are becoming those people that the younger generation can look at. And, the people that, 14-year-old Bali and 14-year-old Harpo didn't have, we can be those people now. And so I want to ask you the last question. And I love this question. It's my favorite question to ask anybody is, if you could give, 14 or 15-year-old Bali advice, what would that advice be?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I would tell 14-year-old Billy, never doubt yourself.
Mhm.
Never doubt yourself. Know who you are, and don't ever doubt yourself for listening to other people's stories or other people's reactions or other people's validations. Listen to your intuition, stand your ground, and know who you are. Don't forget.
Mhm. And like you said in the beginning, don't let, the stories you've heard about yourself from other people be the absolute truth about yourself. You get to construct the absolute truth about yourself, and you get to be who you want to be, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
And I think I would tell her that, don't forget to be magic.
Yeah, we forget
Don't forget
that.
to be magic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that you're infinite, like you're stardust, baby. Like it's a miracle that you're here.
truly, truly it is, right? And I don't know, we somewhere along the line we forget that. And when
Mhm.
you rediscover that truth, wow, what a gift.
What a gift it is. Well, this podcast episode has been a gift, and this
It
conversation has been a
has.
gift. I'm so glad, and I really don't take it lightly that, you acknowledge that this is the conversation. I don't think that, this is probably a conversation that people have approached you with and want to talk to you about. So
Mhm,
I'm honored that I got to be that person who made this space for you. And I think rightfully so. I think that this is such a beautiful conversation that I've wanted to have with you for a really long time. So thank you so much for being open to this and for practicing vulnerability in the way that you have. And, I always, when I'm recording, I have a 17-year-old girl in my mind as the
mm,
listener. And I think that
mhm.
if 17-year-old Harpo was listening to this, she'd be like, I'm magic because Bali said so. And no one can tell me otherwise. So thank you so much for being on this podcast episode.
Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed talking about all this so much.
Awesome. So, if anybody wants to listen to you on the daily, or if anyone wants to connect with you, if they feel moved enough after this episode, how can they do so?
They can find me on Instagram, Lady B961,
Mhm.
and they can find me on Facebook, and or they can tune in 1 to 3 weekdays on 96.1 FM.
Awesome. Well, there you go, folks. Remember that you're magic, and remember to always believe in yourself and to rewrite your stories at any given point. You can rewrite them 5 times a week if you'd like, if you choose to.
Hmm. And you know, you that just at the end, I want to say this because when you say there's a 17-year-old listening and that's how you imagine it, I just want to speak directly to that 17-year-old and say, you are magic. Don't forget it.